Welcome to the Karmic Mirror podcast, brought to you by Fifth Line Studios. In this space, we unravel the profound wisdom tucked within the folds of the self-help world and present it to you in a way that resonates with the heart of the collective.
Our mission is to seamlessly bridge the gap between esoteric knowledge and practical tools for everyday life. Whether you're a seasoned seeker or just beginning your path, join us and uncover the magic within and around you. Tune in and let the journey begin.
Welcome to the final installment of our 4-part nervous system series. Hi, Michelle.
Hello.
In our last episode, we explored the relationship between the nervous system and our bodies, really emphasizing the physical sensations and physiological responses. And today, we are diving into what spirit means within the context of the nervous system. We're going to define spirituality in neural terms and explore how it can influence our brain pathways, really for that greater sense of peace and balance that helps regulate that nervous system. We'll also talk about the roles that faith, purpose, and connection play in shaping our spirit and ultimately regulating that nervous system. Michelle, talk to us a little bit, nervous system, spirit connection.
Yeah, I think it's not as tangible as, say, the body or the mind. And so, spirit or spirituality in neural terms is all about feeling a sense of connection to something greater than ourselves. And that could be a higher power, that could be nature, universal energy, source. And that connection is what influences our brain's pathways, and it does instill that sense of inner peace and harmony. And so when we engage in spiritual practices that we'll talk about today, we're activating very specific neural pathways in our brain that are related to our default mode network, which is how we think about ourselves and how we think about others. And it's also impacting the neural pathways associated with how we make decisions and how we manage emotions, which is all from our prefrontal cortex. And so practices like meditation, prayer, and mindfulness are going to boost those happy chemicals in our brain, like serotonin and dopamine, that help us feel good. They lower our stress levels. And things like supportive relationships and community, which can have positive effects on our mental and our physical health. And also, these spiritual practices are going to, as we talk about in all of our episodes, but especially in episode 1 of the nervous system series, is these spiritual practices stimulate the parasympathetic nervous system. So it counteracts the stress response, so that fight or flight response we talked about. And it activates your parasympathetic, which is the rest and digest, which is relaxation and healing.
Yeah, and shameless plug, if you have not listened to the series in its entirety or would like a quick refresher on what was meant by the parasympathetic nervous system again, we will continue to plug that first initial nervous system podcast episode to each of our 3 following in the series, just so that you can have the base level understanding of why we care about the nervous system. Michelle, please continue.
Yeah. So, talking about, like we said, this kind of maybe not so tangible aspect of mind, body, spirit, or spirit, or if you want to say soul, I think we're talking about spirit in this episode in kind of broader strokes of what spirituality might mean, and also what it really means to balance and balance in your nervous system. So if you look at spirituality in terms of a couple different ways. So we talk about faith. And, like I said, that could be faith in higher power. So God, source, however you want to call it, universe, or your own personal set of beliefs and values. What faith does, however that shows up for you in your life, is it gives you that sense of security and it reduces anxiety. it creates this sort of framework for our brains that help us cope with life, with the challenges, the uncertainties of life, right? So thinking back to whatever your personal beliefs. I mean, we can talk about this a little bit too. I think,
Well, I really appreciated that's
yeah.
the verbiage of often involves a sense of connection to something greater than ourselves. And so
Mhm.
listing out higher power, a universe, beliefs, if nature's your jam, if that
Yeah,
brings you faith and whatever that might look like. I really liked that explanation earlier as well, because faith can be such a broad area and also could potentially feel exclusive at times.
totally.
To us, I hope I can speak for us, like faith is embracing all and everyone's welcome in that, right? So it might look different, but
Yeah. Well, I think what you said, bringing it back to connection to something greater, because what comes up when you say that is that faith for me in so many ways is about not feeling alone because
mm,
we're humans who are not meant to do life alone. And so thinking about faith in the context of spirituality, that is that connection to whatever the thing that drives you. And the other aspect of spirituality is a sense of purpose. So purpose can look totally and does look different for
yeah.
every person. It is not, as we are so societally conditioned to believe, not necessarily tied to your profession, probably not at all. If that's your purpose, perhaps it is. But when we talk about purpose and spirituality and the nervous system, we're talking about the thing that drives you, that gives your life direction, your day's meaning, and gives you that motivation. And I always think of it like literally, like, what is your motivation for doing life? What's the thing that drives you? That is your sense of purpose. And maybe it changes throughout your life, but that is very much a part of spirituality. So it doesn't always have to look like a specific type of faith. It may simply be the thing that really, that inner motivation you have, whatever that might be. The other way that we'll look at spirituality is through social connections and community support, because again, we're always coming back to being connected to something bigger, something greater than yourself. Having community support, these are so important for your emotional, for your physical health, and also it's connected to your brain's reward system. So we talked about those happy chemicals like serotonin and dopamine. Dopamine is your reward chemical. So when you have that constant connection with other people and it's inspiring you and helping being it ties, right? Like everything is interconnected. We talk about mind, body, soul, but all
Mm.
of these things are interconnected. Your sense of purpose can so often be tied with connections and relationships and community in your life. And so that helps create a sense of belonging and well-being, which then shows up in your nervous system as balance and ease and relaxation, or all of the things you want to be feeling within your nervous system.
Beautifully said. And y'all, we are going through some high energies right now. So, speaking of spirituality, well being, like calling in good, maybe just quick taking some breaths because astrologically, right now, there's a lot going on. Energies are very high. Just to give you a little bit of insight to the time in which we're recording, which is not when it will be released.
Yeah,
Do you mind leading us?
yeah, let's do it. I really love the vase breathing. I don't think we've done this on any of our episodes, but just do that because I really love it. Vase breathing, and it's like a very, very ancient breathing technique where you are breathing in through your nose, and as you're doing it, you're envisioning sort of, you can envision below your navel point. Just imagine a little small balloon filling up. And as you breathe in, and then we're going to hold it and then release. So we can do that together. So you're just going to breathe in through your nose and fill up that little balloon below your belly. So you feel your belly expand. And as it does, you'll just hold it there for a moment. It's a little pressure. And then you can release.
Thank you.
Vase breathing.
And one more technique that our listeners can potentially use to help with their nervous system, and a great transition into start talking about some rituals and practices for spiritual well being as we think about continuing to keep our nervous system regulated and healthy. And the first area we'll start is meditation and prayer. So I'm wondering, Michelle, can you define that, or what are your thoughts on just meditation and prayer?
I think one, that meditation can oftentimes be a prayer. I also, prayer can look so different for everyone. So that's kind of the cool thing about everything we're talking about in this particular episode is that it can be defined in so many ways for the individual, for, collectively, whether you belong to a community of a certain faith or practice or lineage. And so when we look at meditation and prayer in regard to the nervous system specifically, they are providing ways for us to connect with our spiritual self by nurturing self-reflection and peace and that sense of connection to something outside of ourselves.
And even if you think about it from like the body, meditation and prayer is taking a pause, which is disrupting the nervous
Hmm.
system also, right? And I know that we're talking about this is ongoing practices you can use because obviously we say when's the best time to start practicing regulating your nervous system, not when it's dysregulated, but also I think these are moments to take pause that really get you out of your body for a moment. And that's what I think is really helpful
Totally.
about these type of modalities or practices or rituals with the nervous system.
Keep thinking back to just, one, the connection to something outside of yourself, and then the very inner aspect of meditation and prayer. And I think that while there can be two separate things, there's so much crossover within them. When we talk about building up a habit, well, when you're praying every day, you're also building up the habit of trusting in yourself, in your faith, or whatever the thing is. And so there's so many layers to that of building up resilience, like you said. So when you're in a dysregulated mode, or when you're, using the context of prayer and faith, when you're being challenged or something really difficult is happening in your life, it's because you've had that regular habit of prayer or of meditation or both. Meditation also, you're quieting the mind, you're deepening your sense of awareness. And then when I think about deepening your awareness, it's so much of it is when you talk about meditation, you're like getting present, quieting the mind, and then also being aware of just how many times your mind is going to wander and bringing it back in because you're continuing to strengthen that trust muscle or your ability to be present and be aware of what's happening. And then I think on a greater scale, emotionally, having that awareness, it's how we start to observe our emotions without getting so wrapped up in them, is when we build up the muscle to be aware in the present moment and not be so involved in everything that's happening, even when things are challenging or vice versa.
The
So,
practice of it is where you can build that really promotes that neuroplasticity and regulating your emotions. And pieces of it, I would imagine you meditate, you pray, and oftentimes I always say, oh, I'm doing all the work, I'm doing all of the things. And I know you and I have talked about this. You don't see the impact until you recognize that you're responding different or your body feels different or you're thinking different about things. And that's
mm,
how I think about meditation and prayer as well, especially for people who are looking for that tangible positive result in things, right? And we're talking about the nervous system, so it's not always a tangible
yeah,
thing here, but I would also imagine, and
yeah.
this would take us into a completely deeper topic if we really wanted it to, but just exposure to meditation and prayer, what that looks like for you, how you've been programmed around that. Even prayer, we're like, oh, I want to start praying. But if you're conditioned, as I was, you think prayer is really associated with the church. And then that opens up a whole can of worms of like religion and church and thoughts around that.
Mhm.
And really, Iana Van Zant said this one time, and it's when I finally started saying, like, yeah, I prayed because I never wanted to say I prayed because it was associated
Mhm.
to something. And she said, the prayer, help,
For sure.
just help. That's it. That's all you have to say. If you have no other words, it's just
Hmm.
help. So those are some of the thoughts that resonate with me when I'm just thinking about meditation and prayer, and help has been enough to just help regulate my nervous system
Yeah.
and calm it down.
I love that so much. Yeah, because so often, I mean, for the first half of my life, prayer was a set of words that you memorized. It was Our Father, and it was, it was very specific prayers that you did right before bed. And as my own spiritual relationship has expanded and I've started to align with my own personal beliefs that aren't necessarily indoctrinated or something I learned, or maybe it is, but it's my own interpretation. Prayer is simply, it is a conversation. It's a conversation with God and by association with my higher self, because I really believe we're all God, living as human expressions, and that's my own personal belief. But back to the tangible piece, and we'll kind of just really touch on this. When we talk about meditation, there are specific types of meditations that are really going to activate the parasympathetic nervous system, that are going to activate those neural pathways in the brain. So when we're talking about nervous system, things like mindfulness meditation, which is all about being in the present moment without judgment. So as I mentioned before, like becoming the observer, and that takes practice. But what mindfulness does is it helps enhance your attention and your emotional regulation. There's also transcendental meditation. That's a mouthful, but this involves repeating a specific mantra to really reach this relaxed state of awareness and relaxation, and also for cognitive clarity. And then lastly, there's a loving kindness meditation, which is also called a metta meditation. This is one of my first experiences with meditation, is through loving kindness. And it brought me to tears and to my knees in that way, that it is a meditation that is about cultivating compassion, not just for yourself, but for others, and not just for others that you love deeply in your life, but for people who challenge you. And it's about cultivating that sort of sense of empathy and compassion for everyone, even, people that maybe we don't feel deserve your kindness and empathy, but it's not about them. It's about your own experience. And so, lastly, I'll just say that there are tons of studies. When I started to look at case studies around mindfulness and the impact that it has on the nervous system and on the brain, what we know is that regularly meditating increases gray matter density in the brain and reduces the size of the amygdala, which is our brain's fear center. So thinking about the impact that can have on how we show up in life just by practicing meditation regularly is limiting the amount of fear that we show up with. And so there's so many, and these studies really illuminate that the impacts happen past the time of meditation. So it's not just when you're sitting in meditation, the positive effects extend well beyond that point. And we have over 3 decades of practices that are being incorporated into psychotherapeutic programs because of the benefits. So the research has really shown the efficacy of mindfulness interventions to help with so many different disorders, including anxiety, depression, substance abuse, eating disorders, and chronic pain. Of course, we recommend under the guidance of professionals. This is not a substitute for medical advice, but the science, the research is there to back what these ancient teachings have known forever.
I have a grin on my face. You're probably like, why is she smiling right now? I can't help it. I train about the amygdala in my professional life. I bring up the amygdala quite often because in what I do, we talk about how the brain works. And every time I hear amygdala, I cannot not think about someone like you, where Ashley Judd goes to a doctor and asks them to remove her amygdala so she can get over her ex-boyfriend because she doesn't want to like smell the smells anymore. So every time I hear amygdala, I just think about that.
Oh
It's
my
so
God.
funny. That was my first exposure to what amygdala was until I really learned.
I love that.
I couldn't have said it better myself. I think that highlights a lot of the benefits in those practices and putting them together in that vein. Good time to transition into sacred spaces and talking about that as it relates to our
Hmm.
spirit. So, things to really think about is how energy and just things around you and people how that can really impact your nervous system. And so having a sacred space or spaces, just how crucial it is to ensuring that that nervous system is regulated to the best of your ability. What makes a space sacred for you, Michelle?
Well, I would say
Mhm.
limited distractions makes a space helpful and sacred to be able to practice. And that looks different. Everyone, I mean, that could look like, I'll give you an example. When I first moved here, I have, as you've been to my home, I have a guest room that functions as slash office slash meditation space. And what I found is that I really loved, it was my dream to have this little meditation space. And then I realized that I actually, and maybe we'll talk about this one day, is my environment in human design is valleys. And I was finding myself wondering why I always wanted to be on the lower level of my house and why I prefer to meditate on the front steps. And of course, outside, I get to look at trees and grass while I meditate, which is really beautiful. But part of my makeup is that I really prefer to be on the ground level. And so I had to kind of work around, this blessing of having this private space when I realized I don't feel connected. I was, and to give you context, my guest room slash office slash meditation room is on the second floor of my house. And I just wasn't like, I loved the space. I had built a beautiful, little altar space. And then I just kept feeling really alone up here every time I would sit down to meditate, which is so funny because I was meditating alone, of course, but something about it just didn't feel connected. And so when I think about sacred space, I love sitting on the lower level of my house. If the weather allows, I'm outside on the front steps because that is where I feel most connected.
I giggle because I'm mountains. So
Yes, so this would work for you.
and there's more to it than just which levels of the house is your jam when with human design. There's a lot more to it with what's your ideal environment. Simply mountains you do prefer to be higher up so you can oversee like all that around you. So I giggle a little bit. Michelle and I have a good giggle a lot of times of how we adore each other and share so many common things and values, but just how different we can be. So I totally agree. And I think it when we say sacred spaces in regards to regulating your nervous system, maybe more so even about ensuring that you have that space for those practices to, or even if it's just a place you feel crazy safe to regulate your nervous system. I mean, I
Mhm.
have gone in closets before and just closed the door because it's dark.
Yeah.
And part of that is for me in a sacred space because I have a very active brain and body, left arrows in human design. I'm always going to be looking for some sort of purpose on an ongoing basis, maybe more so than people who don't have an active mind and an active body. And part of that is it's really hard for me to get in a spiritual place when I'm in my place I live and I can see clutter or chores or
Mm,
things that I can do to make my
yep.
house feel more sacred, which is why going out in nature is really beneficial for me. Right now, it's my bedroom always feels super clean and tidy and everything's put away. I have laundry behind doors closed so that when I do need a space I can go to for those things, I have that. And again, for me, sometimes it's literally been closets because it's also trying to get away from other
Mm,
people's energy and just closing myself in there, the complete darkness and just feeling like I can breathe and do those things is also a sacred space because I just feeling like I'm by myself and that there's not distraction connecting me to ultimately my own spirit, my own voice, my own words, which is faith and intention to me.
And it's gonna feel totally, yeah, like everyone has such a unique way of what feels right in their space. I think ultimately it's distractions. I think in hearing you talk about clutter and all of that, and I super resonate with it. And I think about just like for your sacred space, if that's what you want to call it, what needs to happen so that you can get in that space?
Mm,
Because maybe it's a mental space, maybe it's an emotional or an energetic space, and it's not so much to do with your physical surroundings because you got to work with what you have. And so, what needs to happen in order for you to have that spiritual practice or that, that moment of whatever it is you need to find balance for however long? And for some people, it's going to be different things. Some people need to be around connection and around people. So we have things like churches. Those are sacred spaces. And I think that's a really great one because it's traditionally what we might think of a lot of times in the context of faith, right? We're always thinking about, and that's not for everyone. But I always think about what drew me to church experiences and what I found to be so holy and sacred in that space energetically were the fact that my proximity to music and to that collective energy of people connecting to something outside of themselves. And so, I grew up in a lot of church experiences. And so there's always going to be, even though maybe years for me, but there's always some sort of connection to the music, to the feeling, the energy of it that does feel so sacred, so holy, whether the beliefs a bit differ for me. So that's great. We also talked about just having a cushion, like what are the things, clutter, distraction, but in physical spaces, are you really realistically going to love to sit down for a meditation or for prayer or whatever if you're uncomfortable? So do the things, if it's a little couch pillow or whatever, or a meditation cushion or yoga mat,
yeah.
whatever the thing is.
Let's go on to energy healing, how that can really help our spirit. So, we talk about different energy healing modalities, Reiki. I can't say this word. Can you say it?
Yes, Qigong.
Have you done Qigong before?
I have, and I really enjoy Qigong. It's actually something, it came up in my meditation teacher course to learn Qigong and Tai Chi, and I fell in love with the practices, but it's also on kind of like on my list of things that I want to get more engrossed in, but not now. There's always a running list, but you're like, not today because I'm still focusing on the other things. But our local library does regular Qigong classes, which I think is really, really cool. But there's so many different ways we can talk about it. Those are just a couple Reiki, Qigong, popular ones that people may know of for energy healing. And I think you have a lot to talk about energy healing, but we can just kind of cover the gist of what we mean by energy healing to begin with.
Yeah. So, really thinking about energy healing or clearing, right? There's probably a lot of different ways we could define that. And there's a lot of different practices and modalities in there, but it's really bringing the mind, body, and emotions into attunement with your soul, restoring balance within the system. We have a special guest episode coming out right after this on sound healing. One thing I learned, which was really interesting, is she talked about how talk therapy and cognitive therapy do not clear trauma out of your energetic body. And so when I'm thinking about these different modalities and how it's explained that it's clearing dense energy and connecting with your source energy to sharpen your intuition and clarity so that you can use your own inner guide, that healers in this realm traditionally are channeling universal life forces into the patient that they're working with or the person to help them balance. So, really healing and removing blockages energetically that are in your body. And that really helps to foster energy flow in the body and allows us to feel a deeper connection to our body. So, again, going to that spirit place of connection and purpose. Talk a little bit about, I know you just overall know about chakras. So, like each chakra represents an aspect of the human experience. And I talk about that because the energy clearing experience I had, she really focused on the chakras in our body. Michelle, high level, what can you tell us about the chakras?
Sure. Well, the first chakras, I am going to pronounce it correctly and keep practicing it because it doesn't naturally flow off my tongue, but that's the whole point. First, I think just going back to the energy healing modalities, right? Because I was thinking, for someone who maybe has no clue about any energy healing, what are we talking about? Or maybe you saw like the Goop Lab on Netflix and you saw this person's body being like moved, but no one's touching them. So if you are totally new to energy healing, we mentioned the different types of, like Reiki, like Qigong. And the way that I always look at it in the simplest way, I think, is just that when you bring up trauma, right, we're talking about the natural fluid flow of energy throughout the body and it not being stagnant or stuck. So oftentimes when we talk about trauma being stuck in your body, that may look like or may feel that may actually be energy and trauma or emotions that are so dense and stagnant in one area of your body that your energy and chi in traditional Chinese medicine, qi is your energy, your life force. So it should be moving through the body and not be stuck anywhere. So that's why we talked about acupuncture in our last body episode. We're talking about qigong. We're talking about different healing modalities that are helping move that stagnant energy, release trauma from your body. And the other thing that I think of with energy healing is that it doesn't, there are energy healers. There are people who manipulate your own body's energy to extract those that stagnant energy or trauma or whatnot. And then there's also the energy clearing that can be done,
Mm.
through your own, like I think about like we're gonna, the cord cutting, things like that. Those are moving energy, and maybe
Just
it's
say it. Michelle loves Chris Corsini now. She always liked him, but now she's a big fan like me. So we're doing a cord cutting exercise together from him.
yes, exactly. So there are practices that you can do yourself. So, there's so many different channels for energy healing, but I just kind of had to bring those up. And when we talk about the chakras and there are different energy centers in your body. And so you have your root chakra, you have your sacral, your solar plexus, and you have your heart chakra, your throat, your third eye, your crown chakra, you have your aura, and these are different energy centers in the body where we may have dense energy or lack of flow of energy. And so you want those channels, those energy centers to be clear and open. And as you said, I think you said that they're connected to different life experiences, and that's right. They're different emotions. So for example, we won't go through them all, but you can look it up and we can also certainly bring it up in future episodes. But, you and I talk about our throat chakras all the time. I talk about, my solar plexus. This is your vitality, your confidence, your willpower from your solar plexus. And so I think about the solar plexus is also associated with the sun. And so there's just so many cool ways to look at it. But basically, when we're talking about it in the context of energy healing and the nervous system, these kind of practices that are oftentimes facilitated by a professional, they bring balance back to the chakras. They enhance that flow of energy, flow of chi, of life force for holistic healing, holistic well-being.
So from the experience that I had, I went in again, this was a acupuncture, energy clearing, and channeling session. So there was a lot going on there. A dear friend had set me up with an appointment when I went to visit. And so I didn't quite know what I was in store for, but was definitely in a place of receiving any and all healing modalities that came my way. And part of that session was using a pendulum to really understand what was going on in each of the chakras. And she did a really beautiful job of explaining that when in flow and flowing properly, the pendulum, because it's all energy, coming out of those will, rotate in a specific way. And if not, that is giving her an indication of where you might have some blocks. And then through acupuncture, there was also specific tools she would use and oils. associated
Mhm.
with different. So I know she was opening up my throat chakra. So she had put a specific kind of oil and minerals and then started taking it off because
Wow.
she said, "Ooh, I think I'm opening it up too much." Like, she could sense the energy, how much was coming out
Yeah.
of there, which was kind of bananas. And then also using tools, and I would do it a disservice to even think I could remember the name of some of these tools, but explaining that different parts of the body. And I talked about that with the acupuncture of, I think the example I gave is where she went into my arm with anger.
Mm,
And she was also, your body represents a lot of different things. And at one place she's saying, okay, this is your karma. And again, she did such a beautiful job of explaining it. She probably got the sense that I was pretty inquisitive as well. So
yeah.
she probably just started sharing. But, there are tools, and with these instruments, she would bang them on different parts of my body. And the way she explained it is that if you have stuck energy in there, it's almost, what's the tool? This is going to sound so dumb and I don't even care. The like tool that goes into the cement, not a sledgehammer. What is it?
Oh, a drill. Like
Oh,
a
a drill. Is
drill,
it just called a
right?
drill? Like,
A
the
power
think
drill?
about it like a cartoon with the big construction men are like standing on that like breaks
Yeah,
through the
and I
cement.
think it's called a power drill.
All right. Men
Yeah.
listening to this or anyone who knows, don't slide into our DMs. We'll Google it after this. But
Yeah.
think about it like that, something trying to break through cement. And
Mm,
so there were parts where she would hit it and it's like a thud and nothing would
wow.
hit. And you could kind of see as she's using it, the vibrations in it getting looser and looser and looser. So that is how that energy clearing session went. I mean, it was a while, and she was also incorporating acupuncture and then using channeling to
Hmm.
also direct the session. And also, she literally was just holding on to my wrist and
Yeah.
feeling for my pulse. And that's how she was trained. Just through the pulse, she could start to feel where things were off in my body, which is just
Wow.
such a gift and so beautiful. And
Yeah, yeah.
I will just preface and highlight again, just be careful when releasing energy
Right.
because it can come out in a big way. And so I'm happy to just share high level that after this session, it was about a week or two after. And I mean, I guess not happy to share, but will share if helpful for others to understand the impact of energy clearing and how it can physically manifest in your body. So I had gone to that session and then had a dear family member pass away. So I was working with a tapping therapist. And so we were doing some tapping, which also releases energy in the body. The next day got really traumatizing news. And so I was kind of in this state. And the short story is it's one of those situations where you just are like, am I dying? Is that my
Mm,
body started? I mean, I felt pain all over my body, kind of, but like really my back radiating down to my legs. And then I started feeling it in my stomach and in my sides. And I woke up in the middle of the night with these pains and called a dear friend who is a nurse practitioner just in panic. And like, do I go to the hospital? What's going on? And basically, she said, Allie, it's not localized anywhere. There's nothing going on that I would tell you like to go to the hospital. So I hang up the phone and then I started vomiting. And that's when I really started getting myself freaked out because you Google and you look through all of the things. And I called my friend back and she's just like, I know, I just really think you've got to calm down. You're going through like so much. And I guess the way to full round that is I was finally able to get to sleep, but the next day, like 24 hours later, I was feeling fine. I was like telling myself all of these stories of, you probably just pulled a muscle in your back or like your groin when you were working out, and that's what it is. And didn't think much of it because I spent that whole day just really like sleeping. And then I went back on a road trip to see that same healer. And I had
Mm.
talked to her and she asked me some questions and she said, when was it? What'd you do? And she said, oh, you just moved a whole demon. That was a whole lot of energy. That was a whole lot of blocks for sure. Cause I think one of the questions she asked was, did you feel better in 24 hours? I said, yeah, it was pretty
Mhm.
much like gone. And she said, you just moved a demon, is what happened. And she just so matter of factly was like, but better out than in, is what I would say.
Yeah, gosh. A couple things. Well, first of all, like just highlighting the importance of working with an expert, with a professional when you know that you've got a lot to move and you've got a lot under the surface or in your body that is like really trying to get free and so that you can heal and having resources, having someone to, make sure that you're not doing that type something, like so much release on your own.
Well, I would also say, even if you don't know you've got that much, I mean, I was
Right, right.
I was
Yeah, just being
definitely, I knew I
cautious.
was not going through a good time in life. I knew I had a lot to work
Yeah,
on,
yeah,
but I had never experienced energy moving in my body like that. And
right.
I will say, since that time, because I continue to do modalities where I'm physically moving energy in my body, I mean, just like a month ago, I started to feel that coming up again. But this time, because I had been through it, right? And I'm
Mm,
sure there was some panic to that because there was some other health stuff going on along the time as well. But the reality of it is, it sounds maybe crazy to most, but the only way to describe it, and it's not a panic attack, you physically feel, I felt in my body that I was dying or something was happening. It just didn't feel right. There was too much pain. And really, it was just moving energy. And I've had that happen since, not to
mm,
that extreme, but after some of these modalities. And now I just know. And I'm like, this, you got to give yourself some love. And how can you self care? And for me, it wasn't going to sleep. It's continuing to kind of like move my body and breathe and get that out. But to your point, Michelle, it's having the resources around you. I mean,
mm.
I'm lucky to have friends who are in the medical profession that can help me out with that as
Right.
well. But even just having people in this community to reach out to who could have language for what might have been the case.
Yeah, for sure. And the last thing I'll say about this is that, you obviously talked about this woman, this energy healer and acupuncturist and she does havening, right? Like she's doing all of these things. And it just made me think back to that holistic approach of, this person has the intuitive approach, right? She's channeling. And so there's that connection there. There's the mental aspect of it, of her, very real professional training to be able to understand the, like, as an acupuncturist, to understand the body, the physical body, the meridians, all of the different energy points in your body, and just really having approaching it because like you said earlier when we talk about with Tess in our upcoming episode, we talk about, you mentioned talk therapy alone, and I don't know what the other one you said, but
I think just she
on
said
its
cognitive
own.
therapy. I'm taking
Oh,
that one.
cognitive therapy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when you're partnering them holistically with these other modalities that are also helping you to release that those trapped emotions or trauma in the body or stress in the body, you are taking this holistic approach. And then you have the layered in of those cognitive therapies where you can mentally process what's happening. And I think that's why we always come back to this interconnected, not to say that you have to do all the things because you may not be able to. Um, and also to just keep that awareness, I think is a really something to just notice
Yeah.
or kind of talk about a little bit.
And what's coming up
Um,
that I want to make sure that I highlight too, because I think this is the first time that I'm connecting it. I don't want people to be scared because it's a beautiful thing to
mhm,
have happened. And for me, it was a lot of deep down, really. There's a lot of trauma, and there was a lot of trauma going on at that time. And thinking back, so my havening coach and tapping coach is separate than that healer. And I only bring that up
mm,
not to correct you, Michelle, because the
Yeah.
sentiment still holds true that they have different modalities within there. But I did not tell my havening coach that I had had that big energy clearing a
Mm,
week and a half before that. And so it's just, again, I think it's a little nod and a plug to always keep all of the different people up to date with what you're doing.
mm.
Because honestly, she may not have done tapping with me had she had known that I had gone through all of that extensive energy. She might have said, like,
Right.
you need to chill and
Yeah.
relax, which brings us to the next thing we haven't talked about in any of our nervous system series, which is just rest and
Mm.
sleep and how helpful that is for regulating the nervous system. I mean, Michelle, that's probably one of the biggest things for just integrating all of this work, right?
Yeah, I think integration is key. And listen, I think also to sharing your experience about with energy healing, um, even if you do energy healing and you don't have some big response, that doesn't, I just
And it
keeping that
doesn't,
in
it's not
mind.
working.
Yeah, everyone's maybe experiencing, subtle shifts or maybe it's going to take, a different time frame, but just making sure that, again, like not feeling that your experience or your approach to any of this, and in particular in energy healing, has to look any one type of way. And with rest, absolutely. It's, the reason why we have Shavasana at the end of a yoga practice is that you are allowing your body to just integrate all of the work and the movement and the energetics and the emotions that have shifted in your practice or become more aware to you or whatever that is. Rest is so critical. And, not to mention all of the physical benefits of rest. And,
Well, just at a base level of, I mean, even forget
mhm,
about a dysregulated nervous system. To just
mhm.
have your body functioning at its best is sleeping and rest and recovery.
So we touched on this a little bit already. We've plugged Tess a few times, but that is because we are so excited. She is our very first interview guest, and it will be coming up after the Spirit episode launches. But we listed sound healing as one of the topics in regard to spirit. So, sound healing.
Yeah.
You want to talk about it?
Very briefly, let's touch on this because I can't even hold a match to Tessa's flame when it
Mm.
comes to how beautifully she articulates that. So, not even a shameless plug. Tune into that if you're interested. But sound healing really is that ancient practice of harnessing the power of sound vibrations. The way that it really clicked and aha for me is to think about as souls and human bodies, what are we most made up of? Water. What travels through water? Sound. And that is something that just really clicked with me to really understand that vibrations and rhythms can, and if we're speaking specifically to the nervous system, the sound can coax the nervous system back into a state of balance. So, promoting relaxation, healing, and well being. So, I would imagine, obviously, not when you're feeling more heightened only and dysregulated, but it goes back to practicing that breath work or doing that sound healing work, even when you're in a dysregulated place to help keep you regulated and balanced. What else about sound healing would you feel called to share today, Michelle, just ahead of that episode in regards to
Yeah.
the nervous system?
Well, one that there's just so much cool research and science behind it. And, I'm not the person that's going to really be like, let's prove it by science. I'm just not. I have a pretty strong sense of trust in the things that I believe in, whether I see them or not. But there is really fascinating science to really prove this again, another ancient system or practice that we didn't need proof of, but some people really do. And also, it's really helpful to share the way that, science and the esoteric sometimes go hand in hand, oftentimes. And so, um, I lost my train of thought. But what I really loved how Tess talked about when we say bringing it back into balance, she described it so cool in a way that she said, that we each have our own innate frequency. And so it's like, yes, bringing it back into balance, but it's also bringing it back home, bringing your energy back to your center of balance, your unique frequency that is just wholly you at your core. And I think that was so beautiful. And I'm really excited to listen to the episode again because I haven't listened back, but I'm excited. So we'll leave it for that because honestly, there's so many good nuggets that we talk about in it. Well, I guess I could talk about aside from sound healing. Honestly, the last thing I'll say is just sound frequency in general, outside of the practice of sound healing. There, thinking about mantra and certain frequencies of music. We could talk about binaural beats as one that I know that Lacey Phillips uses in her deep imagining meditations. And so I really encourage people to look up. There's a science behind why we choose certain songs for meditation, certain sounds like, which we'll talk about next is the sound of nature. And it's like those videos where they plug into a mushroom and you get this beautiful vibration and frequency and sound from literal Mother Nature's gifts to us, and how that can promote so much peace in our physical human bodies. Just further shows you that one, everything is connected, and two, just how great the universe around us is that we don't always know how to explain or need to explain to feel that connection. So it's a really beautiful thing. So nature, the cosmos, we have more really cool kind of research that talks about, how nature enhances human empathy and pleasure and reduces stress levels. The word awe comes up,
Mhm.
AWE, awe,
Mhm.
in the sense that what happens when you look at a stunning ethereal landscape and you are instilled with a sense of awe. For me, that's a very physical response. My eyes capture something that to me is not, may or may it can't be man-made. It is truly something unexplainable that has lasted you know, eons. And I'm in awe at this, at how stunning, like how could you recreate this beautiful thing? And it feels like such a sense of peace in my body. And then I think about even more meta is like how little we are in the grand scheme of the world, right? Your problems and your challenges of life start to feel a little bit less like, oh no, everything's happening to me. Because you're like, wait a minute, I'm just this little speck of stardust on this great universe, and how beautiful, right? So thinking about the real physical impacts on your nervous system, again, it's
Mhm.
activating your parasympathetic nervous system. And
And worth
so,
bringing in again with
mhm,
you had brought this into the body episode, the earthing. Again,
yeah.
that's that like the energetics connecting to nature and Cosmo. And I know we've talked since we've recorded that episode, and literally I
Yeah.
ran and watched that documentary right after.
Yeah.
But I've sent you a couple of videos of two little ones near and dear to me,
Hmm.
and you just think about out of nowhere, a 5-year-old little child just stopping, holding her arms up in the wind, just letting the wind, because it
Yeah.
was a very windy day, just take over and literally lay down in the grass and just lay there. And you have to think this little one is connecting to her core essence and really being
Mhm.
present, and think about as a 5-year-old how that's teaching her nervous system to just be chill and relaxed and in the moment and present. And then I think just this week I sent you another little one hugging a tree just out of nowhere. I've never seen anyone do it. 19, 20 months just walking over to a tree and just hugging it. And so I often think that children just really show us how we should be living our lives before we learn differently, right? And that's what
Totally.
came up for me when you're talking about just how little we are, and maybe how much we take for granted just nature and cosmos, and taking that pause to be present and how much impact that can have on regulating our nervous system when it comes to connection
Sure.
and peace and presence and mindfulness. It's really cool.
Yeah. Well, kids are so intuitive. Their world is completely wide open because, like you said, they haven't yet been told all the things that start to frame or blinders on our world and make it less and less open to what we think is possible. And then that's how we get to the adults, and we're retraining our brain to remember, to come back home, to come back to what feels like balance for us. And the last thing I'll say on nature is, think about forest bathing. Do you know the concept of forest bathing?
I mean, I can put two and two together, but why don't I mean, is it that
Yeah.
obvious or you tell us?
It is that obvious. It is forest bathing is truly like you could stare at the forest or nature or trees. And I think it's about 20 minutes that starts to have some real impacts on your mental state and on your physical, on your nervous system.
Did you say grazing or bathing?
Bathing, forest bathing. And if you
Bathing.
look
It
it up,
because
yeah.
that's not what I was thinking. I was like, do you literally get naked and roll around in the
Oh,
forest and you're bathing?
maybe that too, but depending on who
I
you
think that
are,
probably has some
that
positive impacts, some risks, but
Yeah, as I'm covered in bug bites right now from actually laying in the grass on all day Sunday. But
do as I say,
um,
not as I do.
there's an actual in Japan. Well, this is where the concept was really, really coined. And there's an entire research institute on forest bathing because the levels of depression were just so high at one point that they needed to do something as a country to really start to shift mental health. And so they started to explore what time in nature, what the actual impacts are. And like I said, there's a whole institute. It's a really fascinating thing, but all of this to prove such a simple concept that 20 minutes in nature, 20 minutes staring at trees, what that can do for us, for our mental, emotional, and physical state. The impacts are super profound. And so,
So some of
yes.
those impacts being enhancing memory, relieving fear and stress, reduction in heart rate, blood pressure, cortisol levels,
Hmm.
things that we can really tie back to helping to regulate that nervous system for
Yeah,
sure.
for sure. Oh, before we move on, and I haven't started it yet, so I don't want to speak to it because I have no personal experience, but I did tell you again, Tess recommended the workout witch on Instagram, and I was really inspired to go look her up because, as you know, we talk about in the body episode, I am not the one of our duo that will be like, I'm going to work out in the traditional sense. It's not what I'm drawn to, but give me a workout witch, and I am all about it. So I was like, curiosity piqued. I went and I looked her up and I bought her 30-day course that you get lifetime access to. And it's all about releasing trauma. And I think it's called the hip release. And so, anyways, it's 30 days. I'm starting it tonight. So
Beautiful.
I'd love to chat more about that when I have, at least 30 days of experience to speak to.
Yeah,
And
and
I,
another outlet, it sounds like if you're interested in moving some energy, because it sounds like,
yes.
yeah, okay,
Mhm. But she
cool.
talks about like I went on, obviously I was looking at her Instagram and kind of looking at some of the things she talks about, and she talks about, high cortisol levels, how that was showing up for her. And that was, things like her face was puffy or bloated all the time, her body was bloated all the time, or she was having excessive breakouts or just not normal things as a result of high cortisol. And part of that is what really tied to releasing that energy, releasing trauma. So let's talk about, well,
As
you
I
tell
s-
me
as
about
I sit here thinking about, oh, it's something else I have to do. I'm gonna get FOMO. I want to do it.
you're doing, right. This is how you do the tapping right after releasing a ton of energy.
Yeah,
There's no right or wrong. It's just
chill,
all,
Allie. You don't need
yeah,
the workout witch just yet.
that's okay. I mean, that whole experience that you shared. It felt like one of the most three-line, I won't say the word, but like truly F around and find out. And
Hmm.
that's how you learn and experience life is through that. But anyways,
Let's go on to
Yes.
just high level light codes. I wanted to bring this up because I think it's very relevant in the spirit realm of regulating our nervous systems. I was on the receiving end of light codes in Iana Van Zant's 40-day abundance course that I took earlier this year. And let me just say, the explanation that I found is that light code, so it's a visual representation of divine frequencies that are encoded with healing. And to the best of my knowledge, shout out if anyone has more knowledge of this. Maybe you are a light code creator. I would love to know more. We'd love to have you on Karmic Mirror, but uh, I would say people who are creating light codes, to me it feels as though it is a gift. It's not something you go and study. It's something that divinely is inherent on you. I'm sure you can learn more about it and be more educated on it, but that's the sense I get. And essentially how they were used in the course is that they are popping up on the screen and you're looking through them while we're doing other activities, and they're encoded with that specific healing of what we were calling in or working through at that time. Not an expert, don't know much more on it, but I just wanted to highlight that in here because it does feel like a tool that could regulate that nervous system if so called. And then, without further ado, and we're going to have to be careful in this section, Michelle, because you and I could talk about journaling for 62 million hours. Michelle and I are those people who have probably 7, 8, 9 journals in the works at a
Mm.
time. So, writing down thoughts, feelings, experiences, reflections, and this is how does it impact your nervous system, Michelle? You talk really beautifully about the connection of journaling to your spirit, I think. Tie that together for us.
And like I do. No, um, you know I love journaling. No, I mean it is at its core, journaling is, a really incredible way to process, to in my own way, I think it's a great way to call yourself out on your own BS and your own stories and patterns. And if you're doing it regularly enough, you can reflect back on it. You can look at one, I mean, there's just layers to it, right? Like you said, we could talk about this all day and we won't, but you know, I think I mentioned this before. Like, what is one of the first skills you learn in school? It's how to write your name. And so, thinking about neural pathways, well, we have driven down that brain pathway so many times by writing that it's one of the fastest ways to reprogram your mind is through writing. And so, when you are writing and journaling consistently or regularly, whatever that looks like for you, you're really reflecting on whatever's coming up, right? Sometimes it's just a brain dump. Sometimes you're processing experiences in your life. And through that process, once it's out of your brain, right? So talk about mental weight, things that are just occupying so much space in our minds and worry and stress and spiraling thoughts. The second you start to release that and put it on the page, now we're starting to create a little bit of space in our minds to think
Mhm.
about what are the other possibilities. So just that one example of, maybe you're frustrated about something or there's an experience, there's a block, and you're journaling about it. You're not only freeing up that space, but you're starting to look at it outside of your body, outside of your mind. And now you can start to move past it. Well, now that I see, like, I'm starting to process what's happening, and it's on the page, I can start to reflect on, well, what do I want differently? What do I want to happen now versus let me just stay in this stuck thought and spiraling and continued repeating these thoughts without just giving myself a space to let them out, to breathe. You can, if you journal enough, you're eventually going to get down. And that's why I say it's like a BS meter, because eventually you're going to journal the stories, right? It's like sometimes it's your ego writing, you're unconsciously, or you're just, those initial thoughts that come up, the stories we tell ourselves, and then you do it again and you continue to process and you're like, oh wait, there's something beneath that, there's more, and then you do it a little, and you're like, oh, okay, like I see, maybe it's the root, or maybe it's like the thing that I'm getting in my own way. And that's why I keep saying it's a BS meter, because the more you journal, the more real you have to be with yourself. You have to be honest with yourself about what's happening. And so you can't just rely on the mind, on the stories that our mind is telling us to keep us safe, to keep us small, to keep us, and maybe what is stuck. But our mind is thinking it's just protecting us. Our ego is just there out of fear. And so
And when
journaling on it, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, just thank you for the space. When doing that, revisiting again, that thought of our brain isn't meant to make us happy. Our brain is meant to keep us safe. So journaling helps get underneath what's really going on, right? If
Yeah.
and I also appreciate, Michelle, that you have been giving kind of scales, and not like hierarchy scales here, but you've been giving ranges of how I interpreted that is like, hey,
Hmm.
journaling can be journaling about traumatic events and situations, writing that letter to somebody who has really done you dirty or wrong and negatively impacted your life. And journaling can be writing down your dreams first thing when you wake up in the morning.
Yeah.
Journaling can be writing down everything you have to do tomorrow. So you get that out of your brain and you
Yep.
get a better night's sleep. And sleep, we know, helps the nervous system.
Yeah.
So I really love how you give, and with a couple of these examples, you've really highlighted that there's different ranges. So even though Michelle and I, because we're in the esoteric, everyone. We go really deep. Like that's probably most of the time journaling, we'll go really deep in it. But we also journal when we say we have 7 journals. We have 7 journals for different things, right? So one might be that going deep, one might be, I know I have a dream journal. I have like a motivational words journal and
Oh, I love that. I don't think I knew that. Maybe
yeah.
I did.
Well, I've stopped being able to find places where I've put things, but that's very freelance for me as well. Is like learning. And so one of my best friends gave me an inspirational words journal for Christmas,
Sweet.
and I use it just for any words or lyrics or quotes or things that really resonate with me, in
Yeah.
there. So I just have like a go-to. I date it. But
Mm.
that's also it's cool because I can look back to those times and really process. And whether it's the need to feel empowered or, gosh, that really got you through that day, or why was that important to you? Again, it's all different journaling types will take you to a place of presence. I think thought provoking movement of energetics, regardless of the level.
Yeah. Well, I think also with the journaling, looking different ways, what comes up is, one, it's how I know how I think about things. And, so when I'm writing about my own personal observations, I mean, not every day is like a frustration. I'm pretty neutral or pretty at ease a lot of the time. And so a lot of my journaling will just be me observing how I'm showing up. I mean, this week, for example, I journaled a lot about the ways I'm noticing how I show up in friendship, in relationship, and just what is shifted versus past me. And really reflecting on those experiences. So that's one way that I just start to get to know my own mind and how I show up and where my own growth. It's just by being the observer and reflecting on it, documenting it in my own journal. And, the other thing that comes up is obviously I love journal prompts. Like I love nothing more than coming up with really thought-provoking journal prompts because one, I love to share them, but also I just need them for myself. I think about being a person who needs something to respond to. So, giving myself a really good quality question gives me the opportunity to then, for my brain, because we know we're talking about the brain, what happens when we ask our brain a question? Well, kind of everything else kind of is on pause. Our brain is now needs to search for an answer. And so, when you ask yourself a good question, in versus like, oh, how do you feel today? That's a great question, but also could you go deeper of like, how did this particular experience, for example, I have some, a check-in oftentimes with one of my channels in human design is the channel of charisma. And so the question I like to journal on is, did I feel pressured to act or get excited or lit up or take action on someone else's by someone else's experience? And if I did, how did it feel? And how do I separate that? Knowing that I'm meant to respond from my gut and knowing that I'm an open emotional center. So I may absorb someone else's emotions and take it on as my own. So when I reflect on that, I get to get
Was
super.
this when we were talking about music tastes
A little bit, yeah, but it's
a little
also
bit
come
earlier?
up with so many different things. Like even, so many examples in my life where I can reflect like, okay, wait, so in that experience, I felt the excitement, I felt the feeling from someone else. I felt maybe the pressure to me to act on it, and then I didn't. And I get to reflect on like, how did I do that? And for me, that just strengthens my connection to my sacral response. It strengthens my intuition because I get to see very clearly the times where I do or don't act in alignment. And so journaling, I think we've said a lot and we'll always talk about it because it's such a powerful practice.
Mhm.
And it doesn't have to be at length. I mean, I'm doing 5 minutes of journaling every day. That's it. 5 minutes, and I set a timer. And when that timer goes off, I'm like, I don't care if I'm mid-sentence, I'm done. Or maybe I do want to keep going, but truly, like, it doesn't need to be 3 pages. It doesn't have to
Yeah.
be anything.
Gratitude journals. I mean, literally,
Yeah.
you could write down one thing you're thankful for a day.
Yeah. All right. Let's talk about play. Play. What comes up when you think about play? And there's so many things, but yeah, what comes up for you when you think about play in general or in the context of the nervous system?
I think when you ask what comes up for you when you think about play and thinking about the nervous system, I have to first just think about the confetti project and my friend Helena,
Yeah.
who I was introduced to, and not and because got to go to a private workshop with her, and she play is a huge catalyst behind the work that she does and the duality in which it takes up space in life. And so specifically the workshop I went to really talked about how grief and joy can live in the same place, and
Hmm.
how play and sadness, and how do we allow room for all of that. And going and learning more about play is that when you think about activities that bring joy, engagement, it can have positive effects on the nervous system, because people who study how emotions work in the brain um, really have proven that there's seven primary process emotional systems in the brain, and one is play. And so they're really pre-wired in the brain and the source of most basic instincts and motivations. So there's a lot of science around that, and I'm not a scientist, but overall, just being in the play space allows you to release a lot of that energy. I think that is also tied up below the surface of what might be dysregulating or things stored up that might be even perception of how you should show up. I think about it a lot with adults, right? Like as adults, we still need to play, and society might not tell us that we can do that, and how that can limit the amount of things we can release or presence we can have. What comes up for you when we think about play in the nervous system and its positive impacts?
Well, and also for everybody listening, the Confetti Project is a very cool, what would you call it? It's her business, but the intent behind it in the Confetti Project, I mean, in like one,
Yeah, I'm scared to highlight it right now. I'll definitely tag it below. I
sure,
think that because she has different workshops, and I'm a little nervous of misrepresenting it, but what she does have coming up, which I'll plug, Self-Love Labs, where you come together in community. And I don't want to give too much away, but there are a lot of practices and modalities in there around play,
got
and
it.
that will impact the nervous system. So probably some more of the modalities and rituals and practices, but it's finding spaces for joy and play to positively impact your life. Again, we'll tag it.
I think that was a perfect explanation. Yeah, I mean, that's fine. It's not like you don't work for the company.
But I love it so much. That's me. I
Right.
love it so much and
That's
believe so much in
exactly.
the work that I want to represent it beautifully, which is probably my own live hang up here. So I
Yeah,
think
well, I
as long
think you
as you
did.
know.
I
Yeah.
mean, basically for people who don't know, and I barely know because I didn't do it, but there's confetti involved. There's a sense of play. And what comes up for me is that a couple things. First, thinking back to your friend and her daughters who are, like we said, children are so intuitive. And when I think about play, I think about children and I think about what happens as we grow through our lives and we start to experience and bump up against conditioning and things that make us feel like we don't get to play or to approach life because everything has to be serious. We have responsibilities and all of the things. And so we know that as we become adults, our worlds not only get smaller, but our sense of play and awe gets increasingly lower. And there's real, statistics behind this. I don't know them, but the truth of it is that, we know that as adults, how often are we going to allow ourselves to just, see a swing and go sit on it and swing just for the sake of it, or, do something playful? We just don't. We don't do it. And we can't even, it's not even conscious that we don't allow ourselves. And we know that there are so many benefits from that sense of playfulness and joy that comes from just doing things. I think about laughter and I think about, yeah, so all of that comes up with around play. And it doesn't mean that, also for me personally, I think about my husband and we play games all the time because it's the two of us. And, we always joke, we're like, we're like, should we invite, some friends? And we're always like, but I want to hang out with you. Like, and so, when you're two people, we play heads up, we play, phase 10, we play all these games. And, that's a very literal sense of the word play. But I think about the experience of it is like we just get lost in the game and we're laughing and we're connecting. And there's no real serious pressure. And what happens in those moments, like we get to really be in the moment and connect. And so that, or I think about also just hobbies that have to do with playfulness. Like I randomly last year wanted to take up needlepoint because I'm an old Victorian lady and and so that has no purpose or not no purpose. There's no expectation or end result, or I'm not going to turn it into a business. I'm just doing it to have something playful and creative that I can use my hands towards that isn't going online or,
Yeah.
mindlessly watching something that doesn't connect me to something. I'll also plug one of our former classmates from Lumia from our life coaching course, who is a life coach whose niche is all around play. And she's always sharing really beautiful, and we'll tag her too in our notes, Mika, but she's always sharing really cool videos of people, and especially as adults who are engaging in activities that instill that sense of playfulness that really connects us to joy, connects us to that lightness of life.
Mhm.
Anything else to share on play?
Yeah, it's what came up for me when you were talking is even, and I know you didn't mean it like this way when you were saying, we know that play is good for this. We know that it's good for this. I know you weren't saying like you weren't meaning it in that way, but what came up for me is like, I don't think we all do know that. We get
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
so caught up, like we know it, but I don't think we really,
Hmm.
most of us know it, which is why things like Mika's work and the Celebration Lab are so critical, I believe, to
Hmm.
community and support and educating because we know it. We know it takes, we know we should laugh. We know we should find time for fun. We know we should find time for play. And then exactly what you talked about, all of the societal norms or life gets in the way or we're scared of looking stupid or no other adults are
Yeah.
doing that or whatever those hangups are. Being introduced to the self-love lab and that work really let me start to say, hey, I know my nervous system's jacked up and that's appropriate for everything I've been going through, but can I prioritize play a little bit more? And if I can, what does that look like? And for
Yeah.
me, I just made the decision. I was like, more times than not, if a child that I love dearly is wants to play with me or is going to be goofy or wants to do something with me, more times than not, you're going to stop exactly what you're doing and you're going to say yes and you're going to do it. And
Yeah.
about, I would say 95% of the time now, I notice that I'm doing that. And I feel more calm and more at peace. And I laugh more and started to notice like other adults will start to join in and we'll play. And it
Yeah.
really is just it's been so beneficial aside from even just connecting with little ones more and
Hmm.
getting in their worlds. Play has just been a really cool shift for me. Like
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
said, it's like, oh, I was on a road trip and we were swinging, and my friend's daughter is like, you swing.
Yeah.
Okay. And I
Hmm.
mean, I'm like, and you get those butterflies. I'm like, when is the last time I have gotten on a swing? Decades. And
Yeah.
it was just a couple of minutes where I found myself giggling a little bit because I was like, this is actually fun, you know?
Right. Yeah, yeah. Totally. Well, like you said, you know, it's interesting that, as adults, we really do need these people who are facilitating moments for you to safely play, like the confetti lab, the confetti project, like a life coach who helps you connect to your sense of play because we need to be retaught. That's why children are so intuitive, like you said, and just go for the things, will reach for the tree, and because they just know. And we have to relearn how to do that. And so it's really cool that there are people out there doing these awesome, experiences. So,
And they've also started, I mean, into the research, there is research out there that those who have play-filled lives and experiences over those who are more play deprived, and specifically in children too, think they're seeing differences in how they show up with trust, flexibility, optimism, empathy, openness. So there are starting to be more awareness and probably more facts than we know about. Helena's probably like, Allie, there's so much more that we know about this. But for another episode, we'll try and get her on. I'd love to transition into just how do we integrate this type of spirituality, or what are ways that we can encourage people to easily start to integrate spirituality into their daily life to start nourishing their nervous system.
mm, yeah, I think the first thing that comes to mind is that you've got to ask yourself, like, what am I feeling called to do right now? What's the thing? Is it to have a moment where you have that inner dialogue that is maybe prayer or you're just checking in? It can be that simple. And, when I say that to start with, because we threw a lot of things out there, and I don't want anyone to feel like they need to try all the things unless you want to. And maybe you try all the things and find something that works for you. That's kind of the goal. And also, we know so much. We already have the answers to all of our questions within ourselves. And so sometimes we just need to ask, like, what is the thing that might make me feel more connected to my spiritual higher self or to the world around me? What does that feel like right now? And then go do the thing and let that be enough.
Yeah, always be gentle with yourself. I think we've highlighted some in here, but maybe just say yes to the thing if you're invited, right? Yes to playing, yes to going to a different type of group or church or whatever that might look like for you, to start to get more connection or open your eyes up to different types of connection and faith and what that might look like, because there definitely is not a one size fits all model. I think another one is make art with nature. If you are an artist, especially with kids, but if you're like, my dad makes Christmas ornaments out of pine cones and things around his area. And I never thought about how that can be play too, but play and also incorporating getting out into nature for your nervous system. Any other helpful tips and suggestions in integrating that?
Keep it simple. Keep it
Yeah.
very simple, keep it doable, and, work it into your life as is. Don't try to kind of shift your life around a practice because then it's going to feel like a task and less like something that connects you to your spiritual practice.
Mhm. Michelle, how are you? Let's get to our self-love check-in. How are
Let's
you
do
showing
it.
love to yourself in ways that connect with your spirit and promote a sense of calm in your nervous system?
Um, you know what? I think that right now I am doing some very particular meditations that maybe they're not, this is, the word calm doesn't come up, but they are connecting me to my sense of personal power. And to me, that feels calming and grounding. And so I'm really committed to this particular meditation for the arc line in Kundalini and just really committed to not just the practice of it, but how I show up to it and being present and also the reflection. I've been reflecting on the shifts that I'm feeling throughout the month, like subtle shifts in my energetics where I'm showing up and really speaking from a place where I feel connected to my center of power. And like I said, that always for me, when I feel in my power, it feels like it's not a loud power. It's never in your face. For me, it's always really subtle and calm power. And so this particular meditation and just the way I'm showing up for it has been amazing this month, and it feels really
What's
good.
the name of this meditation you said?
This is the meditation for the arc line. It's a Kundalini meditation, and I really love it. And the arc line, we talked about the energy centers. And women have two arc lines. Everyone has an arc line. It goes from their ear to earlobe. But women, we have a second arc line that goes from our nipple to nipple because we are powerful beings. And so this particular meditation clears the arc line so that I can, my vision this month is all about really being clear and open to channel and as a vessel for all of the things I'm creating to come through.
What's a good time to do that? And you don't need to teach me. I almost was like, preach. I love a good feminine divinity, and I'm leaning more into mine. So
Yeah.
I was just giving you the space to talk, but I almost was like, preach, sister. Um, how am I showing up to connect more with my spirit? Right now just seems to be a time where there is so much integrating. Like I'm channeling so much is coming through. And so discernment is a big word that comes up for me as I'm just trying to show myself love. And then I think more specifically, not gaslighting my intuition. And that's been an
Mhm.
interesting journey for me because I think intuition falls very high in that spiritual realm of all the things we talked about. And this occurred to me when we were having a conversation about just when you share your intuitive thoughts with people. And it's been very interesting in the context of the nervous system because I think about how some of my like really crazy intuitive things where I'm like, I don't know why, but I just get a sense that this is happening. And let's just say, like, quote unquote, it's not good. It's not a good thing happening. It's like
Mm,
almost a fear or a bad thing. And then to have that exact thing happen. And this has been going on a year and a half, 2 years where I'm really like, you can gaslight that intuition
yeah.
because it can feel very egoic, it can feel very fear based. Others can definitely say, you have no reason to believe that. Why would you believe that? And I understand that because even in that moment, I think that, like, what's the reason that I would believe? There would be no reason. Don't spend time looking into why that might be the reason, right? And here you can see how all even just that energy, and I feel my energy and my nervous system kind of starting to get activated as I'm talking through that. And so it's just how I'm trying to connect to promote like a calm in the nervous system is like just anytime I have things coming up, really breathing in, and it's probably a lot of tools from the whole series, but really breathing and just saying, like, okay, starting with myself instead of looking for validation from others of I'm having this feeling. Why is this? Just looking for myself and really processing through, okay, let's say that is your intuition. What is this protecting you from? What do you need to do today about that? What can you do today about that? That's just really how I'm working with my intuition is like, okay, you can be aware of it, but what you need to do is clean up some stuff so you're not having a fear-based nervous system reaction to that and feeling on edge for days. Because remember back to our interview experience or that example where we're saying you don't have an interview for 3 more days,
Yeah.
but yet your body's feeling it today.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just trying to get my nervous system regulated around when pings are coming through. And I think coming back full circle to that discernment. Is this a fear? Is it ego? Or could it really be my intuition telling me something, regardless if I think that is a good or bad thing, not labeling it?
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry to cut you off.
Yeah,
But
you're good.
also like discernment between whose voice it is, because your
Hmm.
intuition is your inner knowing. Your intuition doesn't need to be explained either because it's not a mental intuition. It's your, your own inner knowing. It's that inner whisper and it's your voice. And so those questions of having to explain why you have this ping, this intuitive knowing, it's like, well, discerning, well, who the hell is asking me to validate my own inner knowing? That's not my voice. That might be someone else's voice who was gaslighting my intuition and maybe I'm putting words in your mouth. It's like maybe showing me to gaslight my own inner knowing when the reality is I don't have to explain anything. I just know because I know you to have a lot of intuitive pings and very strong inner knowing. And so, it's interesting that comes up, right? Like the discernment piece, like who the hell is telling me to question what I know in my body to be true? Because not only do I know it, but I've had series of experiences to prove in real life that I validated my own knowing by what happened. Anyways, thank you for sharing that and
Yeah.
letting me reflect back.
Yeah, and it's it's also it's good to discern through these things because I do have a
100%.
very active brain and mind. And so I think the reality here is just getting in your own space and your
Yeah,
own energy so you can start to understand. And,
yeah,
you're someone who I will very readily share these things with because it feels safe to have those
yeah.
conversations. And you tend to let me lead and guide and come from a place of what if that was true, as opposed to like, yeah, but you don't really have a reason to think that though, do you? Right? And we talk about that in our sound healing. So
Right.
that's probably why, because we just recorded it, it really comes top to mind of something that I'm really doing to connect to my nervous system and spirit in a positive way.
100%. One, we're both open head and open ajna. So we're both, yeah, I'm going to hear you and be open to it and not feel the pressure to try to change your mind out of like to just be open. But anyways, so
Yeah, it's so beautiful. So in conclusion, we have shared a whole lot about finding balance in the nervous system in this 4-part series. Whether you've logged into 10 minutes of one, 2 minutes of one, or all four, we just thank you for taking this journey with us because we feel so strongly that even incorporating one of these things, and even if it's just from a knowledge standpoint, that it really will positively impact your life to get a handle on understanding your nervous system better. We just really want to reinforce the importance of a balanced approach to the mind, body, and spirit because they are all connected. So, as we close out this series, thank you so much for joining us. Huge plug for our coming episode in 2 weeks with Tess, who is a sound healer. We couldn't contain ourselves from talking about some of those things today. That's just
yeah,
how impactful it was. And again, please revisit these as needed because there's a lot of good stuff in here, and maybe you'll feel called to try a modality that might speak to you more readily in a place of life that you're at later on. So, without further ado, we will bid you farewell and just wish you all the love and light on your nervous system journey. Goodbye, beloveds. We hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as we did. If you resonated with what you heard today, join us in this vibrant community of seekers, dreamers, and creators. Find us on Instagram at Karmic Mirror Podcast and stay connected with us for additional content, updates, and more. We love hearing from our community and engaging in conversations.
You can catch all our episodes anywhere you listen to podcasts, so make sure to subscribe. And if you really love what you're hearing, we'd be so grateful if you would leave us a 5-star review or share with someone who might benefit from our content. Your feedback means the world to us.
As we bid you farewell, we encourage you to embrace the ever-unfolding story of your life. Life's too short for a one-size-fits-all approach. Remember, your path to flourishing is uniquely yours.
Until next time on the Karmic Mirror, stay true, stay curious, and always be kind to yourself.